Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is April 13, 2020, and this is a video called Do You Owe Joe Biden and the Democratic Party Your Vote? Absolutely not. Before we get into the video, if you could hit like, share, subscribe, comment, even if you just comment a word or two, it does not have to be brilliant. That interaction helps to boost this video, helps more people to see the channel, which we're trying to build. You can also follow us at facebook.com/socialism for all or support us at patreon.com/socialism for all for as little as $1 a month. And thanks to our current patrons whose names you're seeing on the screen right now. So let's get into it. Last week I made a video, a long video, it was like over an hour long, I think, called something to the effect of Bernie Sanders betrays base with premature departure from race. Biden, Cuomo, Trump will continue USA on path to fascism, something like that. And first of all, that's still my position. That video, basically the first half of it is me working out on air my, process of detaching from the Bernie Sanders campaign, not from the demands, but from the campaign, which I do feel like is making a colossal mistake, a disservice and an injustice, even more than a mistake, by dropping out the way that he is doing. And first of all, yes, Bernie is not dropping out of the race. The hashtag Bernie on the ballot was going around a few days ago. I don't think that this is going to go anywhere. You can't both say, I'm not going to campaign and keep giving me your votes. That is campaigning, first of all. But basically the point is that Bernie is still on the ballot, even though he's not actively campaigning, but he should be actively campaigning. I find that inexcusable personally. He calls himself a revolutionary. He endorsed Hillary Clinton. That's not a revolutionary act. And then he calls himself a revolutionary again. I mean, first of all, we're talking about a political revolution, not like a guerrilla insurrectionary revolution. But even by political revolutionary standards, this is weak sauce. I mean, he's campaigning for the person that he is calling, like basically the root of all evil, correctly, taking all this corporate money and all that kind of stuff. Basically he's going to go campaign now for the people who he's been saying, there's this urgent need to defeat these people, but Trump is worse, blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't accept that for reasons we're going to get into. I will say that was me shaking off Bernie Sanders within like a day or two of the campaign basically wrapping itself up. I strongly disagree with that, not only on the principle that I just described, that don't go stump for the 1% Democrats. Don't do it. That's everything we have just been rallying against. But more than that, we have a couple of unique circumstances. One is, even before the pandemic, there were obvious signs that the primary is being rigged. Okay. The exit polls are off between 10 and 15% in every state. They found 44 flash drives in Texas that were just uncounted votes. They just found again crates of mail-in ballots that were not counted in Wisconsin. There's a history of this going back. There's a documentary called Uncounted, the story of the California 2016 election or something like that, where it's the same thing, just like rooms full of votes that did not get counted. Bernie needs to speak out against that. If he believes his own rhetoric about urgency, he needs to speak out against that. And if he really is fighting for working class people as much as he claims to, then he needs to do that, because working class votes and voices are being silenced in that process. So there's all of that kind of like generic election rigging, which the Democratic Party has said in court. They got taken to court after 2016 for this. And the DNC lawyer argued that the Democratic Party is like a private club that has no accountability to like follow its own rules. And the primary is kind of just for show if they don't feel like following it. So that's the Democratic Party's position on this whole thing, which, makes running there questionable, although it did get him a lot of exposure. Not going to get into that. But so there was all of that, which Bernie should absolutely be speaking out against, should have done it in 2016 as well. But now we're in a pandemic and we're under unprecedented month-long shutdown orders for April. Back in March, there was also widespread health concerns, and you see states pushing their primaries back to June, which the Democratic Party primary is scheduled to end June 23rd anyway. There's really no harm in, just having all the states push it to the end of June when this pandemic might be over. But instead, not all the states are doing that. And the Democratic Party seems to be just fine with letting people risk their own lives, the lives of other voters, and of society as a whole by going out and voting, rather than calling their primaries off. So we have kind of a dual situation there. Anything could happen, both because people are stuck at home and have nothing really to do but to think about money, work, social welfare, and that kind of thing. It's making the case for everything Bernie was talking about. So, and his campaign just basically got a 2-month extension before people will actually be casting their votes in a lot of states. And anything could happen in 2 months if he were to actually campaign. Instead, he's suspending his active campaigning while saying, I'll still be on the ballot, vote for me if you feel like it. That's malpractice. That's totally irresponsible, especially for somebody calling himself a revolutionary. I don't care what you say to me. That is my position. It took $19 million from working class people and who knows how many tens of thousands of hours of people's time. He owes it to us to stay in the goddamn race and not go campaign for Joe Biden or just lie down and let Joe Biden have it. And beyond that, so, we don't owe him. Beyond that, now that Joe Biden is the presumptive nominee, first of all, he's gone back into hiding. Bernie's being in the race made Joe Biden at least work a little bit for the nomination. Now he doesn't have to work at all. Does Joe Biden, deserve anything from us? Do we owe Joe Biden anything because Trump? No. And let me explain that. So something very significant happened about 40 years ago in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan. It's called the Neoliberal Turn. This was a class project by the 1%, the capitalist class. They decided to do like a full-on assault on the New Deal and Great Society social welfare programs and basically undo social democracy. This is called neoliberalism because it was a new push at classical liberalism, which is to say laissez-faire or unregulated capitalism. Laissez-faire means like let happen or do what you want. Capitalism where there's no taxation, regulation, redistribution, social programs, etc. And that has been the push since the 80s, is this kind of like libertarian, just like let the market decide kind of thing, and to hell with poor people. And we've seen that incrementally, steadily from both parties, kind of the death of left liberalism or social democracy and the rise of this kind of like naked capitalism again, which, we had in the US and in the West before, like the robber baron period in the late 1900s, the Gilded Age, a time of great wealth inequality. Well, we have it again, except there's high technology now. So there's even more wealth and even more wealth inequality and worse poverty. So the Democratic Party is just as responsible for the Republicans for that. So the Democratic Party used to get more of its support from labor unions and community organizations. So there was, although the Democratic Party usually was headed by people from the ruling class who are more socially liberal or, believed in like helping poor people out with some like social programs and welfare and assistance, basically. There was also a kind of counterbalance within the party from labor groups and other working class advocacy groups that had actual power within the party to exert some influence over the party's direction and platform and policies. Well, in the 80s, under Reagan, that changed. There were a lot of Reagan Democrats, and overall, the party decided to just start taking corporate money during that decade instead. We got Bill Clinton, a very right-wing Democrat in the 90s, then George W. Bush, the War on Terror, and under the guise of the War on Terror, you get the latter 20 years from 2001 to now, very accelerated imperialism and neoliberalism that rush to an austerity surveillance police state domestically and imperial aggression abroad. If you go back and read there's a white paper by a think tank called the Project for the New American Century. Those were basically the George W. Bush cabinet people. And they argued in a paper called Rebuilding America's Defenses that, now that the Soviet Union had fallen and the capitalist West was essentially unopposed by an armed insurrectionary anti-capitalist state like the Soviet Union, that it was now time to make the 21st century an American century of hyper-capitalism, like libertarian style, just full-on, like naked aggression of capitalism. And that's exactly what they started doing after 9/11. And that's continued under Obama, and it's continued under Trump. And so we basically have the first half of neoliberalism, 80 to 2000, with this, not under any particular pretense. Well, actually, it was always kind of dressed up as anti-communism, particularly during the Reagan years. And then there was globalization in the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union. And then the War on Terror of like, let's just take it using tanks and guns, like directly take it. Okay, so you have the first half and the second half being the War on Terror, which is still ongoing. Well, what have the Democrats done to stop that? George W. Bush started 2 wars. Obama turned that into 7. Obama told the people in Flint that the water was safe to drink. Obama didn't do jack shit for people, is what I'm trying to say. And you hear this excuse constantly that, well, there was a racist Congress and the Tea Party. Yeah, not at first. The Democrats controlled the entire government for 2 years. And what did they do? They passed a right-wing healthcare plan, like the most right-wing option, which leads us into Joe Biden today. There are stark differences between Joe Biden's platform, which is like, I don't know, you would think everyone was a millionaire if you looked at Joe Biden, and capitalism was actually working for everybody, which it never will, from what Joe Biden is offering. It's insanity. And then Bernie was winning with people under 50 years old. So what does Biden do as a policy concession? This is like, by the way, also the only thing I've heard so far in terms of policy concessions. Is Biden going to do Medicare for all, which was like Bernie's centerpiece of his platform? No. What's he talking about instead? Lowering the Medicare age from 65 to 60. That's like a mockery of, that's not just a weak position. That is mockery of the victim. That's what that is. That's saying, we don't need you. We don't need your vote. Fuck the working class. That's what that is. So even Hillary Clinton was talking about lowering the Medicare age to 55. Back in 2009 and 2010, when they finally did pass Obamacare, the ACA, which was a right-wing healthcare plan, originally thought up by the Heritage Foundation in the early 90s. That's how progressive the Democratic Party is. But back then, they were talking about lowering the Medicare age to 55. That was 10 years ago. And then, kind of like every few years dropping it to like 45, 35 until finally everybody was covered. Well, they didn't pursue that, obviously, even though they could have. It was conservative Democrats, 1% owned Democrats who opposed that, who opposed the public option. Obama himself, I believe it was Dennis Kucinich, who's kind of like a more liberal, progressive senator from, I think, Ohio, who had reportedly had a confrontation with Obama one day when he said, what's going on with the public option? And Obama just told him flat out, like, we're not doing it. So that's the Democratic Party. There are really no socialist elements within the Democratic Party. Now, we understand as socialists that, for people who take up the mantle of I'm a socialist and go out there as an activist, we're probably the most class-conscious elements of society, right? Like, we've read Marx, we've studied some theory, We have maybe engaged in organizing a workplace or organizing a tenants union, or, just gotten involved. We're maybe in that like 10% of the cutting edge of people who have kind of done the most working class activism, which, as you go through experiences like that, it can really refine your class consciousness. So most people are not there, though. I mean, we're talking about a spectrum, and most people just are, might realize they don't really like the Democrats, but they're maybe willing to vote for Biden over Trump. I'm here to tell you that the Democratic Party should collapse. They just spent $1 billion to crush Bernie Sanders, which Bernie Sanders is now lying down for. Unfortunately, it's a great disservice to us all. But this is where we're at. No, they don't deserve your vote. No, you don't owe them anything. And the reason we got Trump, which I guess is the point of all of this, is you look back over the last 40 years of both parties taking 1% money, advancing a 1% capitalist agenda. We're just going to wind up here again eventually. Whether you can buy yourself 4 or 8 years of an Obama or of a Biden or of a Hillary Clinton, the overall conditions for working class people under capitalism are getting worse. We know this from Marx. More and more people fall out of the middle class and they fall into the proletariat, the class of propertyless, dispossessed workers who have nothing to sell but their labor. This is just the natural progression of capitalism. And eventually, all we can really hope for, or all we can really advocate for, not hope for, I mean, because you have to work for it. It doesn't just happen on its own. But, I mean, as a political goal, what we can hope for and set our goals that we're going to work for as is the abolition of private property. That capital is going to keep getting centralized into fewer and fewer hands. It's going to get consolidated. That is just the way that capital works. Trying to turn it back is a reactionary effort. You can't really do it. It can't be done. What you can do is basically make it not a problem anymore that people don't have private property, or that the vast majority of people don't have private property. As more and more people become propertyless, what you eventually do is you just abolish private property, and then it doesn't matter that you don't personally own it because you're part of the class that owns everything. It doesn't matter that you don't have money because the society no longer uses money. You see? So this is the drive towards socialism, is not to try to make everybody middle class again under a private property system, which is what many reformers and FDR types who want to just prolong capitalism and prolong the system of private industry, private property indefinitely. I mean, that middle class to them is the proof that capitalism works, except there's a problem. Capitalism keeps destroying the middle class. That's just inevitable. So they keep enacting all these reforms to try to turn that wheel of history backwards and put more private property into individual people's hands. The problem with that is you always have a permanent underclass regardless. It's never the case that everyone is middle class. That's just not a thing. And it's a losing battle anyway. People keep sinking into the proletariat. The capital keeps getting consolidated. So eventually, at some point, you just have to say, this system doesn't work anymore, and we need to move to the next mode of production. We need to move from capitalism to socialism, where we just say, look, we've made all this wealth collectively as a class. Let's own it collectively as a class, take the capitalists' legal rights to that capital away, and give the legal rights to the working class collectively. So what do we do in this election? Just forget the Democrats. That would be my advice. Just completely forget them. I don't know how well I've made this case for, because to me, it's just so clear. Joe Biden is not going to do a damn thing for the working class, and ignore Bernie Sanders and tell him no. Go on Twitter, go on Facebook and tell him no, stop stumping for Joe Biden. You're really doing the working class a disservice by having them believe in the Democratic Party. So what can you do instead? Go join socialist organizations and organize and fight in your community and nationally for socialism. Join DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. Join PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I believe that's a pretty good organization from what I've seen of them, but they need branches in a lot more states. They're only in a few states right now, I think, maybe 10 states in the U.S. Join the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World Labor Union. The IWW is a militant, anti-capitalist, radical labor union that wants to organize workers for general strikes to take over the economy and capitalism and have it run directly by workers. I personally think that the IWW's heyday was pre-1960, and there's too many radlibs and anarchists in it now. And by anarchists, I mean not old school Marxists, but more really kind of radlib anarchists. I wish I could articulate that better. They're not doing the work that used to be done in the IWW is what I'm trying to say, but you can still learn good skills, and there's still a lot of good people in that organization. Join the Green Party. There's a Green Party in, I think, every state. Can't hurt. There's no ISO anymore, International Socialist Organization. I probably wouldn't have recommended ISO, but they actually disbanded last year anyway. There's the Workers' World Party, which actually PSL, which I mentioned before, split off of, but both parties continue to exist today. Those are Marxist socialist parties. What else? There's the Socialist Rifle Organization. There's the John Brown Gun Club. I actually don't know much about either of those firsthand, but I've seen a lot of growth in those organizations. So there are socialist organizations you can join pretty much no matter where you live, even if it's just the Green Party. Get involved, because, the more that the 1% leaves us hanging on our own, the more we are going to need community, regional, and national networks to fight back and stand up for working class interests. And eventually, if we're serious about this revolution business, that does not happen just by getting hashtags trending. That happens by actually having mass organizations that can mobilize thousands and tens of thousands of people in a state or city and shutting things down. That's how that happens. The Democratic Party has been standing in the way of the working class for a long time. They have probably been more responsible than anyone else for edging out and suppressing left groups, because they're the competition. They're no, those socialists are extreme. We're the version of the left that's sane. We're the adults in the room, and so, but really they don't represent the working class. They represent capitalists. If you vote for Joe Biden, you're voting for a party that just pulled out all the stops, did everything it could to crush Bernie Sanders, to crush Medicare for all, to crush a Green New Deal. I mean, there's literal possibility of extinction at this point, let alone just not being able to pay your bills, but of actual ecological collapse at this point. The growth of technology has allowed for an abundance that is tremendous, that actually could feed and clothe and house everybody in the world. But we also need to maintain that abundance while transitioning to more ecologically sane and ecologically responsible technologies, which capitalists just don't have a need to do. They're out for profit. They're not out for long-term. They don't factor in the social costs of their profit-seeking activity because they have no reward for doing so. You would think that it would be built into the system somehow, but it isn't. It's literally just this ruthless game of who gets the most profits. Whoever loses gets bought out by somebody else, and then capital just gets more and more consolidated. And, that system, we're either going to take it over and move it into socialism, keep the industry, and then move it into socialism and run it on the collective behalf of the working class in a sane, and that includes ecologically sane way, while continuing to produce abundance for everyone, or it's going to destroy us. It's going to pollute the planet to the point where there's some kind of ecological collapse, and then, civilization as we know it may collapse along with it. So obviously we don't want that. We've been working at this, technology thing for thousands and thousands of years, And, that's been the history of the class struggle for thousands of years. We'd like to actually inherit this thing. So I'm going to call it there. But no, the Democratic Party does not deserve your vote. They gave us Trump. We had 8 years of Obama. They didn't do jack shit, and then people wound up voting Trump. Obama promised hope and change. He didn't deliver on it. And then we wound up getting Trump because people were so desperate. They went to like an obvious con artist, like total sham of a game show host, just because they thought this guy's a wild card. And yeah, there were plenty of racists too in that coalition. But there were also a lot of Obama voters who were just trying to vote for change. I'm not trying to sweep the racism and xenophobia and nationalism under the rug. But, there were a lot of people who did vote for Trump. Even that famous Hillary Clinton quote where she called the Trump voters the basket of deplorables. So that whole quote is that as she said, I'm now a disciple of Hillary Clinton apparently, but even she said, half those people just want a better economic deal, and then the other half are this basket of deplorables, this racists and people who go for Trump for the backward policies. And then the other people are just kind of looking for a change. Well, why she kept promising the status quo is, it's the 1% money. What a mess. But I'm going to sign it off because I just can't talk about this shit anymore. In conclusion, thanks to Bernie Sanders for running, letting working class people dare to demand a working class platform and to dare to say no to 1% money. No thanks to Bernie Sanders for dropping out in the middle of a race where anything is possible and for not calling out the Democratic primary to be the sham that it is between the uncounted votes and the votes being cast during a pandemic and everything else. He really could use this opportunity to take the revolutionary insurrection within the Democratic Party to the next level, which he is declining to do. Joe Biden, good luck with that. The guy's a senile mummy rapist. The New York Times just issued a story trying to cover up Joe Biden's longstanding pattern of unwanted touching, kissing, fondling, and, saying weird things to people, which got so much backlash for their effort to cover it up on Twitter. They actually deleted the post. It's just, there are real limits to where the 1% can even go anymore. We are exposing it, but we just don't have that much time to waste anymore. So join your socialist groups. Let the Dems collapse. Let's just fight the Republicans. If that's possible, I would love to see it happen. If it was just the Republicans, I think we could win. The Republicans versus actual socialism. I think that we could win that fight. The Democrats in there, it's like we're taking it from two different parties. It's too hard. If it's possible for the Democrats to collapse, I would love to see that at this point. But yeah, don't fucking vote for them. That would be my advice. Join other organizations instead. And stay safe during the pandemic. I'll be uploading a lot more content thanks to the essential workers who are out there being asked to risk their lives and not being offered unemployment to stay home. That is fucking travesty. And the government needs to be paying us all a lot more to stay home and needs to be doing a lot more for essential workers too. It's absolute insanity that we don't have the personal protective supplies and everything else going around. There's medical interns dying in hospitals treating people. It's fucking crazy. But stay safe, and you can find us on the web, and we'll be uploading more content soon. Thanks.